Welcome to the Same Day Podcast, where we discuss driving incremental business growth and other topics related to real estate, property management, and entrepreneurship. Now, to the show at hand.
Matt Zalk here. I'm the host of the Same Day Podcast, where I connect with top business experts and real estate leaders. We've had a lot of past guests on, but just to highlight a couple, we had Devin Howland talking about economic development in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Yoni Schmidt of the Keyrenter team has spoken on multiple occasions, but one time he spoke about property owners frequently asked questions. And Kevin Evans of Liberty Air Services talked about HVAC systems, how they work, and why they're so darn complicated. They give us tremendous headache in winter and in summer, but he explains a little bit about why that is and what we can do to get in front of those issues. Today's episode is brought to you by Carlisle State Farm. Carlisle State Farm helps you protect your most precious assets and investments. Whether it's your home and auto, investment rental properties, or other valuables, call Carlisle State Farm for a quick and painless phone call to potentially save double digits on all of your insurance needs. Visit diallile.com. That's diallile.com, or call his office at 918-878-7771. Today's episode is also brought to you by Keyrenter Property Management. Here at Keyrenter, we are a full-service property management company helping our clients buy, renovate, and operate real estate assets. We help our clients build wealth while taking the headache out of property management. Ryan, I don't know if we've ever talked about it, but I'll just let you know. Lining up contractors to do make-readies and get them done in a reasonable amount of time is a huge headache after a tenant leaves. Contractors are busy. The work seems to drag on forever, and all that leads to lost rental income for our owners. But at Keyrenter, we line up our dedicated vendors so that unit turns can happen super quickly and we get more money back into those owners' pockets. And that's why no matter what rental you have, a single family home, a condo, townhome, apartment, we've got the management solutions that you need. Go to keyrenterpmc.com or email us at info@keyrenterpmc.com. A huge shout out to BNI. I've spoken many times about BNI, Business Network International. It's a great referral-based marketing system, program, meeting where there's one seat for every professional classification in specific to a chapter. So I hold the property management seat in our chapter. There's an attorney that focuses on divorce. There's an attorney that focuses on wills and estates. There's a CPA. There's a banker, commercial, residential, et cetera, et cetera. And we pass referrals back and forth to each other because over time we've gotten to know, like, and trust each other. And that's a huge part of business. And it's a huge part of how we generate leads and referrals in our business. So a huge shout out to BNI, which is also how I know Ryan Mayfield. So let me do a quick introduction. Ryan Mayfield's a leadership consultant and a teamwork coach. He works with organizations to improve communication and teamwork, and he helps leaders craft teams that make other leaders jealous. And he's working with our team. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and some other things. Ryan is married. He's the father of one, and he lives here in Tulsa. Ryan, welcome to the pod. How are you?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here. I'm not sure if I can keep up with you on this podcast, but we're going to find out.
You got to speak quickly or somebody else is going to speak over you. That's like in college days when you're in the dorm or in a fraternity or whatever, you just like scarf as much food in as possible because you never know where your next meal is going to come from.
I just think about, I listen to podcasts all the time and I'm usually on like 2.5 times speed. I don't think I could do that on this one.
Well, it's like Lex Friedman. He speaks or Sam Harris. They speak very slowly and methodically, very intentionally. Let's talk about your teamwork coach, your business. Tell us a bit about what you do and how you do it.
Yeah. So you gave me a great intro, but I work with a lot of different companies and organizations around the country, a lot in person, a lot online, basically helping to offer leadership development opportunities and teamwork consulting and coaching to help those teams work together better and actually like the people that they work with. Turns out teams are more productive when they actually like each other and want to stick around.
Love that. There's I've heard a lot of things about, in-person office environments or team, like where teams are really together and cohesive. I've heard that though they can be distracting, bullpen environments are great for camaraderie and people work better together. I've heard that for people that are gay, transgender, whatever else, they feel like they can't share the entirety of their lives, and therefore they're not as involved in office politics and office, like they're not kind of as invested in I guess, water cooler discussions, and that's detrimental to their overall productivity in an organization. And so having a culture in any office that's more accepting and open and diverse is really beneficial for productivity in general. What's your stance on kind of being in the office versus being on Zoom as a team, generally speaking?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of pros and cons both ways, right? But it was interesting, especially as COVID started and everybody was working remotely. We all knew how to do the in-office thing, but the at-home thing was brand new, and most people were just not very intentional about it. And so, if you try to operate the same way that you did in the office when you're virtual, that's just a losing combination, right?
Yeah.
And the same is true the other way. So if you try to operate like you're virtual, but you have everybody coming into the office, you're going to lose on that one too. And so you just have to be aware of what are some of those things. You even brought up the water cooler stuff. And that's why there is some actual value to some things like a water cooler Slack channel, or, all those kinds of things where you have to adjust for the environment that you're in. So I don't know that one is inherently better than the other. Probably certain industries would lend themselves one way or another. But on the whole, I think if people are intentional with how they design those things and the habits that they create inside their teams, you can have a healthy team either way.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. The water cooler Slack channel. There's so much of that stuff. We use WhatsApp, and I've had a perpetual battle with Robert Davis, our COO, who wants to put us on Slack. And, and I've always fought it because I'm a WhatsApp guy. I've always been a WhatsApp guy. And I just find like we're not going to get our vendors, for example, on Slack. So now I have to have WhatsApp for my vendors, text for my vendors, and Slack for my internal team. And I've just been like, it's the fewer apps, the better. Sometimes those all company Slack channels or WhatsApp channels can be a distraction. Sometimes they're super fun. They help build that team camaraderie. I mean, we have kind of a football season. I don't even know, a fantasy football league that a bunch of people participate in, and they're talking trash all the time, and it's fun and it builds camaraderie, but it's also a huge distraction. How do you strike the right balance in that team environment? And then we're going to get to like real teamwork stuff, because this is all kind of nonsense, but stuff that I'm just curious about.
No, it's good. I'm a big fan of many different categories of channels, right? So even just a generic water cooler channel may not be that effective. Just if you have 50 people in it and they're all just sharing random things about football, about their dog, about their kid's soccer game, right? Like you may not care about a majority of it. I mean, you may not even know 90% of the people. So like some of the Slack communities I'm in, I love how they segment stuff. So you could have a specific Slack channel that's just for the fantasy football league, and a specific one that's just for, weekend activities, or, whatever it is. That way people can opt in or opt out to the ones that they actually care about. So if you do not care at all about fantasy football, you don't have to hear people talking about it. Right.
Right.
And so that's kind of my take on that one.
So you can mute the channels that you don't want to be involved in.
Absolutely.
Gently. It's kind of like telling the person behind you on an airplane to talk more quietly on their cell phone. There's not really like a nice way to tell somebody to take the conversation out of the main chat group and take it to the fantasy football chat group, though. That's one of the challenges I find. It's like, I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'd like to say this with a smiley face, but this is not the right platform. This is not the right venue. So I do find that to be a challenge. Tell us, with your teamwork coach, what are some of the tools that you're using to help teams work better together?
Yeah. So I actually have something called my toolkit. And in my toolkit, I have about 80 different tools that I utilize with teams and organizations. But some of the foundational ones, probably the biggest foundational one is something called Five Voices. Five Voices is a communication and leadership index, similar to some different maybe personality assessments or things like that companies might already be familiar with. But Five Voices really does focus on your communication style, your leadership style, and it's just really, really simple compared to a lot of the others. That's why I like it so much, is because, if you take a Myers-Briggs or a StrengthsFinders or an Enneagram or whatever it is, all of which I think are good and have their uses, you might remember yours, but then you get yourself in a team of 10 other people, and the odds of remembering what everybody else's is, plus what all those different numbers and letters actually mean, it's an uphill battle at that point. Five Voices is super intuitive, and it's much, much stickier in a team environment. At least that's what I've found.
What if I take this communication and leadership index tool, or you tell me what my style and leadership is, and it turns out that I'm like not a good leader, or I just don't have the right attributes to be a good leader? Do I just have to quit, or do I demote myself, or do I put somebody else in as the leader? What happens?
That's a great time to hire me as your leadership development person because because that's the other thing I love to do is take people who have lots of potential or maybe find themselves in a position of leadership but have not gone through the training or received the resources they need to do that well. You may be familiar with the Peter principle. You ever heard of the Peter
No,
principle?
no.
It's the idea that people rise to the level of their incompetence.
Got it. Yep.
Right.
I've heard
And
of
so
it.
you promote your, top salesperson into a sales manager, and they were an incredible salesperson, but they're a terrible sales manager. And I help fill that gap to equip people with the leadership training tools and resources they need to not just be good salespeople, to be good managers of salespeople.
Oh man, you really tapped into something that's so near and dear to my heart and scary, is that we have people that are such good property managers. They do everything right, and they ultimately hit a salary cap because they can't take on more doors, which means they're producing more revenue and profit for the business, and therefore they can share in that benefit. There's a maximum that any human being, even if they're doing it to the utmost competence level, it can really handle. So eventually, if we want to keep them, we've got to promote them into senior property managers or regional leads or under the executive team or whatever. And then we lose out on a key and critical asset to our business, which is a top quality property manager. It's, so we can, to your Peter principle comment, we can give them the tools to rise in their level of competency and then have them manage people. But we still lost that person from the property management perspective, and that's so painful because we have to then backfill that seat.
Yeah. And I think one of the hardest pieces of that, and not just in that industry, but anywhere, is it's the idea. I was actually just talking to your team about this less than an hour ago, is the idea of unconscious competence, right? For those people that you're talking about who are in those positions that when you promote them, you're afraid of what you're going to lose. What you stand the risk of losing is their unconscious competence. It's the things that they are so good at that it's almost natural for them. They're just incredibly gifted. But if you ask them how do you do this? They may not be able to explain that because they don't even understand their own unconscious competencies.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we'll talk about is helping people take their unconscious competencies and make them conscious competencies, because you cannot pass on, you cannot train other people in an unconscious competence. You have to make it conscious first, and then you can pass it on to other people. And that's how you backfill without losing kind of what, makes it magic for you having them in that role.
But some of the stuff, or the parts that make these people so great is that they understand that if it's 8:00 on a Saturday night, they can pick up the phone and handle something in 2 minutes that will save an owner $2,000. And a good example is, I get an emergency phone call, a house is flooding. If a property manager doesn't pick up their phone, it could flood for 12 hours, and that leads to all sorts of destruction. If it just gets handled right then in 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and a plumber's on their way, or they tell a person how to shut off the water at their house, that alleviates so much stress. It's stress and hardship and pain and money for the owner, but it's also that property manager on Monday morning will have to walk in and deal with that. Now there's mold, and they have to deal with mold mitigation and sheetrock repair and the plumbing issue that was underlying it to begin with, on and on and on. A pissed off tenant, a pissed off owner. It's like, I can't train that. You just turn on your phone. It either disrupts your happiness and it's not worth doing the job, or you view it as like, look, nobody's calling me on Tuesday afternoon and I take my child to ballet class or to a baseball game, but I also answer the phone on Saturday. There's like this intrinsic thing where people just either feel like everything is a disruption, or I just take this job as a holistic part of my life. And that's a critical, not that you're going to be able to give me any experience sharing this, but that's a critical component of what we do. It's kind of like a never sleep office environment. And again, if you do something if you're up late Sunday night addressing an owner issue, nobody calls you on Monday morning and goes, "It's 9:00. Where are you?" Just
right.
Sleep in and do your, just kind of work a solid work week. So anyways, that's me ranting and raving. Unless you have any solutions for me there.
I mean, it's funny. So this is actually the third conversation I've had in the property management world today. And the first one was with different organization, and they were talking about the exact same thing. And so we were talking about a concept called 5 gears. And 5 gears is kind of these different ways of viewing your time throughout the day. And, in a normal 9 to 5 job, okay, we leave the office 5 o'clock. And that's when I'm changing from fourth gear work mode into second gear, connect mode with my spouse, right? Well, property management stuff obviously is not that way. Like you were saying, you can get a call at any time of day. And so what we were talking about was using a concept like the 5 gears and being able to kind of block out on your calendar, but not in a concrete way, right? So, okay, maybe I need some fifth gear, which is like your hyper focus, get stuff done kind of time. Maybe I need that right now, and I've scheduled it for 9 a.m. But at 8:55, someone calls me and they need something from me. Rather than just not doing that, I'm going to slide that fifth gear block down in my calendar to a different time just to hold myself accountable to make sure that it still happens. And so it's a fluid time blocking system that you can implement, is at least one solution to what you're talking about.
Interesting. I love that. Are you working with my team on that?
We haven't got to that one yet on your team, but it's on the list.
Cool. Before we get any deeper into your teamwork coach and your foundational tools and your toolkit, tell us, let's step back. What's your background? How did you start your professional career, and what took you to this journey of entrepreneurship?
Sure. Well, really, the teamwork coaching, consulting, all that kind of stuff came just because I was on the receiving end of it for a really long time. Just different organizations that I was involved in after college. So I'm a TU guy. So I went to TU, graduated from there, and then just different organizations or teams that I was a part of all tended to have a really high value on leadership development. And so I sat through, I couldn't even tell you how many different leadership development workshops and conferences and seminars and trainings and whatever else, right? And one of my skill sets is just being able to teach stuff. And so I started getting asked, hey, that thing that you guys learned, could you come and teach that to our team? So, okay, yeah, sure, that sounds great. And then that started happening often enough that I thought, man, I should make this into a side hustle, right? And then that happened enough that I thought, man, I should make this into a part-time gig. And that happened enough that I was like, gosh, I think I can do this full time, And so that's been a little while now, and I've had the privilege of getting to work with a lot of different great teams and organizations, and it's just cool being able to be almost like an extra person inside the room, right? And get to have some awesome conversations where people are processing through real decisions that make an impact on businesses and communities and people's lives. And so I love it. Once a month, I get called somebody's work therapist, which I wear as a badge of honor. And your team actually called me that today.
I mean, it's true. I mean, I've had business coaches in the past. I know the majority of our executive team, has a business coach, and it is really like business therapy. And you come in, you download, you relive some experiences. They're painful. You work through others. It really is business therapy in a pretty
I had a
way.
client that I shared an office with for a season, and it was funny because they asked me at one point, it's like, could we just move a couch into your office and then we'll just come in whenever we need something? And I thought, well, may have to charge more for that.
The Freudian business coach approach. I love it. One challenge though in growing a business and scaling a business is that you don't know when your ability as the leader, whether you're beating the drum loudly and often enough from a core value culture perspective, and whether that's cascading down through the team from a hiring and firing perspective. You don't know whether your team, your executive team, your senior leadership has the capacity, the skills, the desire to reinforce what you're saying, whether they're bought in fully. And then, when you get 1 or 2 or 3 layers down, you don't know the real leadership capacity of those people. And it might be too late before you actually see how they lack the leadership that you want them to have. And it's natural as a business leader to expect that other people can figure it out, because you figured it out. When we started this, it was just me, and I was doing sales, and I was doing operations, and I was doing finance, and I just figured it out, and everybody else should have that same competency. And it's not true. And so at some point you've got to bring in either internally experts in the organization that can really do a lot of this training and leadership development, or you've got to bring in somebody external. If you do it internally, the person that's training has to have the capacity to do it, right? You need capacity to hire capacity. So oftentimes you're in such a crunch growing a business that you don't have time to hire people. You've got to figure out a way to carve out the times that you can hire and add capacity. And without that, you just are running so fast, you don't have time to add people. And it's really painful. So you got to make sure that the person that's doing the leadership training has the capacity to do it, and has the desire and willingness and ability to do it. But if you're going to bring in somebody externally, there's not a way to directly measure the value that you're paying for. So say you're paying $1,000 a month, like you can't quantify that. It just feels over time that you are facing fewer problems per unit of business. Fewer things are percolating up to you. You have fewer clients that are leaving, less churn. In other words, it just feels like things run smoother. But how do you talk to people about return on investment when they're paying for consulting services like leadership, training?
Yeah. Well, I would actually push back just a little bit, because I do think that we can show some really good ROI on that stuff. This isn't how everybody does it, but one thing that we offer, we do quarterly team performance assessments with our clients. And so we baseline that at the beginning, so we know kind of where our starting point is. We're talking actual data-driven metrics on things like communication, relationships, alignment, execution, capacity, team culture, all that kind of stuff that maybe most businesses don't track or don't have the means to track. You can track your own turnover, right? You don't need me for that, but I can help track those other things. And so what I actually do with those clients is we'll take that assessment, and then wherever we're scoring low, those are the things we're going after month after month. As I'm working with them, we're going, hey, we're going to improve team communication. 3 months later, we're going to take that assessment again, and we're going to see a huge increase in that. And we're going to shift our focus somewhere else. So it's data-driven, like strategic leadership and teamwork development stuff. It's not just shooting in the dark. We're actually aiming at something, and we intend to be able to show a strong ROI on those things.
I mean, so you're quantifying it. You've got the data. You can quantify a trajectory or show a trajectory over time. But still, I mean, how do you take communication improvement and put a dollar figure on that?
Yeah. A lot of the conversation that I'll have with business owners around that is trying to figure out what it's actually costing them currently, right? Sure. And so I remember one conversation I had with a business owner. She was having a big issue with turnover. And so I was kind of, pressing her a little bit. Okay, what is it costing you to have this much turnover, right? What's it costing you in terms of training hours for the replacement employees? What's it costing you in terms of lost revenue for clients that you didn't get because you had unsatisfied people or because people left or whatever it was? And, I obviously don't have access to those numbers, but I pushed her to find those numbers. And she came back and said that she realized that her turnover rate was costing her about $10,000 a month. Yeah. So at that point, it's like, okay, well, I think we can help with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not going to be the service that you're providing is going to be a fraction of that. I mean, obviously any fraction is a fraction.
Absolutely.
1/1 or 0/1. That's a stupid way to say it, but it's going to cost you just a small bit of that. And therefore it's absolutely worth it to get that number down in a significant way.
Right.
And it's true. Right. I mean, the cost of hiring is tremendous. The cost of the resources that are involved in training is tremendous. The cost of paying people severance when they leave. Of course, Oklahoma's an at-will state. You don't really need to provide too much justification, and you don't need to provide them with severance, but we do in a fairly significant way. And it always upsets me when we have to let somebody go that's just been a poor performer for an extended period of time that we've tried to work with, and all of a sudden I'm paying them to go home. It pains me a little bit. But anyways,
yeah,
it really does cost a tremendous amount of money. Tell us about your ideal client. Who's the best client to work with from your perspective?
Well, so I have clients all across industries. So, as we've said, property management, but insurance, car washes, chambers of commerce, nonprofits, so all sorts of different stuff across the board. But the companies, like what makes a company who I want to work with, I was thinking about this just a minute ago, was there's one company in particular I can think of that while they do provide a service for people, they provide car washes for people. The way they describe themselves is they're a leadership development organization, and they just happen to fund that by washing people's cars, right?
Interesting. I was going to ask you about the car washes.
Well, and that's who I want to work with, is people who actually care that much about developing their people and about having a sustainable business model that's not just about bottom line revenue, but it's also about raising people up and equipping people to reach their potential, to do their best work, to become the leaders that they have the potential to be. And so, I mean, that's who I'm looking for. Size doesn't matter. I have companies that can all fit around a dining room table, and I have companies that have over 100 franchises across the country. And so size is irrelevant and industries irrelevant. It really matters, do the people in charge, the shot callers, the gatekeepers, do they want to develop their people and want to be able to not have to put out fires all the time?
But my question is, how can you view your colleagues as anything else? I mean, I was thinking in a car wash, there's a lot of people. There's the guy that comes at the front and he's got a tip jar out front and he scrubs your car with a little bit of soap before you go into the automated car wash. I can't imagine putting that person through a leadership development training course. But then I think, you know what? If that person can do what they're doing really, really well and train the next person and the next person and the next person, go up 3 levels, all of a sudden they're making the business owner a lot more money and they're able to extract an enormous salary themselves. And I tell all of our people the same thing. Our intention is not to keep you in your position, as painful as it can be sometimes, not to keep you in your position where you are forever, but we want you to go up and train other people and replace yourself. We're always talking about replacing ourselves. Yeah. And the economics are very simple. If you're doing a lot more work and you've taken a ton of stuff off of my plate and off of the people below me's plate and their plate and their, et cetera, you just come and say, I want more money. And I have to make a decision. Do I want to replace you with 3 people or do I want to give you more money? And the decision is obvious. So it's pure economics, and it's easy to exploit the business owner when you're doing a lot more, taking a lot more out. It's just basic. And I tell my people that all the time. Take on more responsibility, handle things well, and you can command a bigger salary, which is everybody's, some people's ultimate goal.
Well, and it goes even back to what you were saying earlier about property managers and getting people that will actually answer their phones, right? You can't start the search process for somebody who will answer their phone when you're thinking about promoting them into a property manager position. You need to start that thinking whenever they're at the most entry level position that you have. When you're talking about the car wash, the guy that sprays your car before you go in, that is a potential store manager. Right. And so that's why you invest in that person, is because that might be your store manager, in a month, in 6 months, in a year. And you can start that process now, or you can wait till they get in that position and they're already behind the 8 ball, and then you're doing cleanup.
Right. We operate our business on EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System. It's based on a book called Traction by Gino Wickman. And it is, in essence, a series of meetings, which is weekly, quarterly, and annually. And you build your rocks, which are your quarterly goals. And the expectation is that you really can't think in excess of 3 months at a time. So you're building your quarterly goals, and those wrap into your annual goals. And the weekly meeting is to promote a greater cadence of bursts of activity, I guess, right? So every time you leave the meeting, you leave with a couple of key actions, and therefore you do them. And if you look at a trend of over 2 months, if you have a meeting every 2 months, then you peak right after the meeting, and then you fizzle back into your daily work. And then 2 months later you peak. So we want to do it every week to make sure that we're getting towards our quarterly goals. Now, EOS is a program that you can implement yourself. You can read the book and you can go through the steps. I always recommend to my friends and other people that, I talk to, that they not do it, that they actually use a business implementer, somebody that's approved by EOS, because it's just far more effective. They've got all the tools. They train you in a day, 2, 3. You can use them as coaches, consultants, guides forever if you want. And in our case, we, had Nate Brim, who's a local EOS implementer, do, I think, 3 days, 2 days of a vision traction organizer, which is what this is, the traction lingo. And then we did a quarterly meeting or something like that. And then Robert on our team ran with it because he's very gifted in that space. But the alternative is that you do it yourself. Takes a lot longer, less effective, I think, because I've seen people do it. But my question to you, in a very long-winded way, is there work that you train that's doable, that the leadership of the company can do on their own? Or is it kind of mandatory to use your tools and to use you in order to get access to your tools?
No, there's a ton of different options for how you could implement. Obviously, yes, you could use me. I do one-time events. I also do ongoing kind of retainer style work with clients. So those are obvious options. the other end of the spectrum is, yeah, you could pick up the book. There's a Five Voices book by Steve Cockram, Jeremy Kubicek. And you could pick that up and begin to try and implement that with your team. Totally fine. Kind of in between those two ends of the spectrum, though, are a few different options. One is I do have a lot of stuff that is self-paced. And so if you wanted to go and take the Five Voices assessment right now, I could send you a link and you could go do that. You could share that link with everybody on your team. They could go do that. You guys can have a little conversation about it and probably get a lot of good stuff out of it. There's online course content that is all self-guided as well. If you want it to be, you can go through it that way. But kind of probably the optimal thing that people could do in between those two extremes is I do something called Catalyst, and Catalyst is where I help train a point person in your organization, right? Somebody that you want to kind of take over the training in-house, but I will train and support that one person and make sure they have everything they need in order to implement stuff inside your organization. And so it's kind of a hybrid of the two extremes that way. And so that's a really good option for people as well.
And so you found success in training the trainer in essence?
Yeah. So I work with a lot of people who do that. And it's a really, really great setup because that person usually already has a lot of influence inside the organization. It's not some random person that they don't know coming in and doing it. But also it's, they just know the ins and the outs of what's going on there better than I do. And so whether or not I'm involved, having a catalyst is always a huge boost for this kind of content.
I love it. Who are some people in your industry that you really respect?
Well, so I partner up with a company called Giant that they're actually out of Oklahoma City. I mentioned a couple of the guys' names there. They're the authors of the Five Voices, Steve Cockram, Jeremy Kubicek. And gosh, I could name, 100 other people in that ecosystem, but Giant is an incredible organization. I could go on and on about them. Outside of Giant, that's like my actual official partner, and there's like financial implications with them. Outside of that, I've always really liked, oh gosh, I'm blanking on the name, Five Dysfunctions.
Lencioni.
Yeah, Patrick Lencioni. Lencioni stuff is super good. And so I will, use that in conversation for sure with people. I'm not an official, licensed practitioner of any of it or anything, but there's a lot of brilliant stuff there.
But just so for anybody that doesn't know, Lencioni does, I guess, what would you call it? Fable-based lessons. So there's a company or there's two companies. One leader is doing this, one leader is doing that. They interact. One succeeds, one fails, and the fable kind of unfolds with a bunch of lessons that are tied together, right?
Yeah. So his stuff is really good. It's easy to take in, right? Because of the writing style you're talking about, but also extremely practical. And he just kind of lays it out. It's almost like he's inviting you to take this and implement it on your own, right? And so his stuff is really, really good. Also a big fan of story brand stuff, Business Made Simple, with what's that guy's name?
That I don't know. What is it called? Story brand?
Yeah, story brand. Gosh, I can't.
Donald Miller building a story brand.
Donald Miller. Donald Miller has a lot of stuff on his Business Made Simple platform, and he certifies guides as well in that material. And it's just all excellent. He has a little bit more of a marketing bent, but he also has a lot of good leadership and just overall business principle stuff that I really love.
There's also kind of on that same, I guess in that same vein, there's the book The Goal, which is a process of ongoing improvement by Ellie Goldratt. And that's a great fable-based story. It's about, yay thick. It's probably 500 pages, but it talks about process improvement in a factory, how they identify the bottlenecks and how you can put more throughput through. It's also fable-based and is a great story for process improvement, but just on a...
that's good. Yeah, of course, John Maxwell is another big one in that space. His stuff is pretty classic at this point. So fan of that for sure.
What podcasts do you listen to?
Oh gosh, I literally probably listen to hundreds. You just uncovered something about me that you didn't know. Is I listen to so many podcasts that my podcasts are actually ordered by the day of the week.
Wow.
So depends on which day it is, but I'm using my phone right now to record my video, so I can't even tell you. But the Story Brand podcast is big. Giant, my organization, we put out a couple different ones that I listen to a lot. Patrick Lencioni, his stuff is super good.
Does he have a podcast, Lencioni?
Yeah, he has a couple of them.
Cool.
Yeah, he has 2 different ones that are really good. Those are probably the more relevant ones.
What's the last book you read that you really loved?
The last book I read that I really loved. Well, I've hung out in some biography area lately, so I don't know how relevant some of those are. I think the last one I read was the biography of Malcolm X, which was it was awesome though. It was I had a cursory understanding of his life, but there was a lot of stuff in there that I'm like, good grief, I've never learned about any of this. So that one was good.
Cool. Ryan Mayfield is a leadership consultant and teamwork coach. He works with organizations to improve communication and teamwork, and he helps leaders craft teams that make other leaders jealous. Ryan, how can people reach you if they would like to learn more?
Probably the easiest thing is just go to the website. It's yourteamworkcoach.com. On there, you'll find all the links to the social media, to emails, to all that kind of stuff. You can email me directly at ryan@yourteamworkcoach.com. But yeah, just head to the website, yourteamworkcoach.com.
I love it. Ryan, thanks for being on the pod.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Same Day Podcast. Tune in to a new show each week and be sure to subscribe to get future episodes.